Evening, everybody. I think we have a quorum, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We're missing 2. Oh, Miriam. All right. Gonna wait for Miriam to join.
Well, Mateo, while we're waiting, I have another meeting at 7:30 that I can be a little bit late to. Do we have anything critical going on tonight?
Everything the CPC does is critical. The most critical thing is obviously we need to vote on the warrant articles, particularly, it's important to vote on that on the first one for the grant. But yeah, and that's why I changed the
That
order.
was the only thing I saw in the minutes that seemed, in the agenda that looked okay.
Okay, we have a quorum. It is after 7, so I'm going to call this meeting of the CPC to order. All members of the committee are participating remotely. Matteo Pangallo, Rita Farrell, Alan Hansen, Henry Geddes, who's listed as meeting host for some reason. Oh. I don't know how that happened. Miriam DeFont and Elaine Vallejo, all participating remotely.
Do we know if Jake is going to ever be a part of the committee or not?
So the email that I had from Jake was indicated that he was stepping down from the committee at the end of this year, which I assume means fiscal year. And so I've reached out to seek a replacement for him, and I have not yet heard anything about a potential replacement.
Okay.
So he is still absent. All right. The first item on the agenda is review and vote on minutes of March 23rd. Because there was no second at the previous meeting for the minutes. Is there a motion?
Rita, you're muted.
Thank you. I move that we approve the minutes of March 23rd.
I'll second that.
Is there discussion? Miriam?
Yeah, I just wanted to share with the committee some feedback I'd given Elaine about the minutes. I had some concerns about them. I understand that minutes don't need to be transcripts per open meeting law, but the open meeting law checklist from the Attorney General's office indicates that minutes should allow a person who didn't attend the meeting to have a reasonable understanding of what was transpired in meeting. And this particular meeting was also a public hearing where people were giving testimony. And I think that there's a somewhat higher bar for completeness in a public hearing process that we should be thinking of making sure that people's testimony is accurately reflected. And I did offer some comments to Elaine that didn't get reflected in the final version. And I think that I have concern about that. I feel like the minutes don't really reflect the full flavor of some of the testimony that was offered. So that if reading these minutes, if you didn't attend the meeting, I don't know that you'd be able to understand what the rationale was for the concerns. I understand that there's Zoom recordings on YouTube for people to refer to, but the open meeting law doesn't really, the minutes are really, the Zoom recordings are not a substitute for the minutes under open meeting law. So that I just wanted to voice those concerns. The other concern I had is that because it was a public hearing and people were offering written testimony that was sent to the board ahead of time, none of that written testimony was listed as documents used. And my recommendation would be that there'd be a list of all the written testimony and perhaps even to attach that written testimony to the minutes as kind of a way of curing that. But those are my suggestions. Thank you.
So I'll just jump in and say that, so the guidance that the town clerk provided is that the minutes that were submitted to the committee do comply with open meeting law, and that minutes don't need to explain the rationale given for arguments. They need to just, as their name suggests, provide a summary of the discussion. Rita?
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that this was, in fact, we called it a public hearing, but it was not an official public hearing. It was not a public hearing that was advertised. It was
Elaine?
So the reason I didn't include all of the documentation and all of the discussion was because the discussion was on a topic that had no jurisdiction for the CPC. It was concerning the PFAS and the playing field, which we had no responsibility for. And so I did put in all the people that were there and what they were talking about, but it was not pertinent to the CPC hearing. And so that's why I did not include it.
So I would add that, per open meeting law, there should be a list of the communication that the committee received, since we did consider it. I would suggest an amendment to the minutes that would include a list of what was received by the committee. As Miriam said, we don't need to necessarily attach it all to the minutes, but I do think that there should be a list of those things that were sent to us in advance. And I also want to make sure so the clerk also did remind the committee that we shouldn't be having discussions about minutes via email, that those are discussions that we should be having, as we are now, as we did in last month's meeting, in our public meetings, and not by email. So I just want to make sure we're all aware of that as well.
So are you saying that you want just a list of what was sent to the committee?
So the open meeting law indicates that we should have a list of any documents or materials that are discussed or referenced in a substantive way. So
Okay.
just included like the mention of the Silverio ruling and those other items. There should be a list of like a table of contents of those other.
So you're not saying to include those in the minutes?
No, we don't
Okay.
need to include those. I think that it's going to become cumbersome if we do. The purpose of providing the list is so that somebody who is looking at the public record can know that those documents exist and can make a public records request for those specific documents.
Okay.
Rita?
You're muted.
sorry. I'm not at home, so I'm a little okay, so can I amend my motion then to include any correspondence, emails, anything else that was received by the committee?
And I'll second that.
Henry, is your comment on that motion, or is that on a?
It's on just the minutes themselves. As you know, I registered my concern about the minutes last time. I think that the problem there is that we never had a chance to discuss the Silverio case as a committee and its implications for any decisions that might be made thereof. And I think that was problematic. After all, the whole session was premised on that particular case. And for myself, going into that meeting, I had no idea what was going on, frankly. But it appeared that most people had already decided Silverio is the defining feature of this situation.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt, but in terms of the minutes themselves, Henry, what is
Yeah.
what would you like to see? Is there?
Well, I guess again, you know, it at this point it's a moot point. It's not even happening, but I'm just saying, in the future, we really need to be a little more careful about how we preview things, and as I said last time, we should be thinking about the science about these things. You know, recent science says zero tolerance for this substance. That convinced me that this is something we don't even deal with in any indirect way. It's reminiscent of DDT at a time when it was quite acceptable for a very long time, and suddenly it becomes absolutely not tolerated. That's all, you know, and that's why I think that the minutes could have reflected more the views of some of these folks, although I may not agree with all of them, but you know, just as a basic procedural thing.
So I mean, the question of agreeing with them obviously is moot to the point of the minutes. I think that, I mean, I understand your concerns. I also feel that the minutes that Elaine submitted because they do identify what the concerns were. They were voiced by each of the people that spoke. They do repeatedly identify artificial turf and PFAS. I do want to point out for the record that the case decision, as well as the summary judgment, I did circulate that as soon as I received it to the committee before the meeting. And I realized that getting something, you know, the day of or the day before a meeting might not be enough time, might not provide enough time to read it, but that was as soon as I received it from the Community Preservation Coalition. Elaine?
I just want to go back to the point that we're talking about the minutes, and we're talking about what CPC can do. And we cannot make any funds available for artificial turf. That is plain in our jurisdiction. And so that's why I felt that none of this was, even though it is important, it is pertinent to the whole project, it's not pertinent to what was in front of us at that time. And so we had to make a judgment on what was in front of us at that time, and it had nothing to do with the artificial turf. So we really have to stay within our boundaries, because otherwise we're talking about things that we have no jurisdiction over. And that's why I did not put a full discussion in the minutes.
If I might respond. Yeah, I get it. And it was a compelling argument. However, we have a moral obligation here as a committee to spend money so that we're not jeopardizing the health and welfare of humans and other species. That's simple, basic principle. And we can make decisions. We don't have to go by a ruling that goes back to 2021. We have science that tells us that this substance is highly toxic, even in small amounts.
Henry, I'm going to interrupt because I don't think that anybody on the committee disagrees with the science.
My point is simply,
We're
we
discussing
have a
the
moral
minutes.
obligation to point out this. That's what I discovered on my own, independently. You know, looked up, it takes a little Google, find out what the EPA is doing with this. Harvard, you can check it out. Harvard School of Public Health is posting this all over the place.
Again, I don't think that anybody is disagreeing with the science, and that's also not what we are debating right now. We're debating the minutes that were presented and whether they satisfy open meeting law about what happened at the meeting on March 23rd. And again, I would note that the comments that were recorded in the minutes from members of the public do succinctly describe the subject of their concerns, which is repeatedly mentioned explicitly as artificial turf, PFAS, health concerns, and environmental concerns. Those are in the minutes, as well as the names of the people who said it, and the details of, that is to me sufficiently clear, that is to the town clerk sufficiently clear for purposes of open meeting law. So again, Henry, I absolutely understand your concerns, but the question before us is, do these minutes capture sufficient to open meeting laws requirements, the discussion that we had on March 23rd? Miriam?
Sorry. I just want to point out that one of the comments that I had suggested to Elaine have a little bit more detail, had nothing to do with PFAS. It was some testimony by Mary Kopecki discussing the financial feasibility of the project. And she went into quite a bit of detail, but the draft minutes that were finalized and distributed to us had one sentence. And I felt like that didn't do justice to the detail that she offered. And I think the other concern I would have is, I understand this discussion about PFAS, but I think that we're making a prejudgment about what the concerns were of the public in talking about PFAS. And if people were talking about their concerns and wanting to make a link to the goals in the community preservation plan for projects being prioritized that are both feasible, but also contributing to the public good, whether people believe that indirect funding of artificial turf is contributing to the public good, seems apropos, and certainly apropos enough to reflect in the minutes, because people share those concerns. So I don't know anything about the open meeting law that says if you think their comments were inappropriate, then they shouldn't be in the minutes. I don't think that.
I will say that I did run these minutes past our town clerk, and she listened to the meeting, and they are appropriate. So I'd like to move the question along as to whether we're going to approve these minutes or not as amended.
You're interrupting me, and I was in the middle of a sentence.
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished.
No, I was still talking. I wasn't saying that the minutes, I wasn't making a comment about whether or not the minutes were appropriate. I'm saying that if a member of the public made a comment, whether we thought their comment was appropriate or inappropriate should not be a reason for not including it in the minutes. That doesn't strike me as being in keeping with the spirit of what the law is, but we can move the vote. I'm happy to move on.
Is there any other discussion from the committee?
We're going to vote on the amendment first, right?
Yeah.
To
So
amend the minutes, okay.
motion that's been seconded to amend the minutes to include a list of the documents that were referenced in the meeting, including public testimony. So that's what we're voting on right now. DeFont.
Nay.
Pangallo, aye. Vallejo.
Aye.
Hanson.
Aye.
Geddes.
Nay.
Farrell.
Aye.
Okay. 4 ayes, 2 nays. The motion to amend the minutes carries. The original motion was to approve the minutes as amended now. It has been seconded. Defont,
Okay,
Pangallo, aye. Puleo,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Geddes,
Nay.
Farrell,
Aye.
4 ayes and 2 nays, the motion carries. Proceed to the next item on the agenda, item 2, review and vote on minutes of April 12th meeting. Is there a motion?
I move to approve the minutes of the April 12th CPC meeting.
I second.
Is there any discussion?
What do we do about the fact that we never had someone move to adjourn? I tried to capture that. I know we all voted, but nobody.
I think it's happened before. And the meeting did end.
Hey, I would just forget it, I mean,
Okay,
My understanding is under Robert's Rules of Orders, it's the chair's prerogative to adjourn a meeting if there isn't a due motion. So that meeting is adjourned.
that's right.
thank you.
Ironically, our shortest meeting and our longest. Is there any discussion about the minutes of April 12th? Henry?
Yeah, I don't see my intervention in those minutes. I guess they didn't mean much to the committee, and that's fine, you know. It's a minority viewpoint, I suppose. And whatever. Like I said, it particularly
I did-
stings. It particularly stings as a
I think I-
Latino on this committee. It particularly stings for me.
The
Doubly
reason
minority.
I will tell you why I did not put anything in there was because the motion to approve was by Rita and there was no second. So we really weren't supposed to be discussing them without a second, according to the rules. And so they were tabled for a future meeting. And that's why I didn't put that in.
Okay, fair enough.
Are there any other points of discussion from members of the committee? All right, seeing none, we'll proceed to vote on the minutes of April 12th. Geddes,
Aye.
Gallo, aye. Leo,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Farrell,
Aye.
Font.
abstain. I wasn't there.
Correct.
Okay, the motion carries. Moving on to the next item on the agenda. Drafting and voting on the warrant articles. So I circulated the draft warrant articles that I put together. I tried to avoid novelty and innovation in these and basically just fell back on what I found from previous years in warrant articles. The first of these being the West Cemetery project. Let me see if I can pull that up. Can you all see that okay?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. This is essentially modeled off the previous West Cemetery project. Any feedback from the committee on this? Okay.
Looks the same as the one we did before.
Seeing no additional feedback on the draft. And again, these are going to have to go through Donna McNichol for town council's approval, legal stuff. I'll entertain a motion.
I move that we approve the warrant language as presented. for the West Cemetery Preservation Project.
Is there a second?
I second.
Is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll proceed to the vote. Paleo,
Aye.
Gallo, aye. Hanson,
Aye.
Eddies,
Aye.
Carol,
Aye.
Aye.
all right. Moving on to the second of the 3 warrant articles that I circulated. This one I am a bit less sure of. Let me see here if I can. There we go. Operational transfers of community preservation funds. I would appreciate it if somebody who has been on the committee a bit longer than me might let me know how we determine the dollar values that appear in this warrant article.
Rita, go for it.
Yeah, I believe we get these from the town accountant. And Alan, can you confirm that?
No, that's true.
On the past that you have,
Yeah,
that you have done that.
yes.
So we should get that from Gail,
Yeah.
the town accountant,
Sometimes you got to remind her. Well, you
right?
got to tell her that we need it.
Yeah,
And it's a certain percentage, isn't it?
yes. Yeah, so it's 10% of the into the 3 categories, and then the balance goes into the budgeted reserve.
Okay. So into the 3 categories, so not
Mhm.
including recreation.
It's open space and recreation is 1 category.
Mhm.
I was wondering about that. Okay. So should I remove the excluding recreational purposes?
Yeah, I just say open
Mhm.
space
Just
and
say open
recreation.
space and recreation.
Seems so disorganized.
There you go.
And will you please send those to me when you get the full amounts, and I'll just add them to the minutes?
Yes.
Thank you.
And is it historic resources or historic preservation?
It should be historic preservation.
Okay.
Mhm.
In the past, it said.
You said
resources.
historic resources. I wonder if it was historic preservation resources, but yeah, I think preservation is probably.
Yeah, I agree. I think
Very
that's what
That is wrong. I'm sure Donna will let us know.
I think that's what it has been historically, is historic preservation. I think.
I'm just checking right now, looking up what the exact language is, but we should make it, it's historic preservation and affordable housing, not public
It's
housing.
not, it's supposed to be community housing. It's not supposed to be affordable housing. That's not the statute language, is community housing.
Okay.
So it is correct as written.
Miriam, you said it's historic preservation?
That's right, Miriam, right? Historic preservation.
It is historic preservation. I'm just looking at the Community Preservation Coalition website, and they say affordable housing, but okay, whatever.
But
it
in
is.
the statute, it calls it community housing.
I mean, I suppose the important thing is what do we call it in the, what is the name of the account, right? Like that's.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Want to
And
make
it's
sure.
that it gets into, right, that the money gets into that account.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm going to leave this as is, but I'm going to follow up with Donna just to make sure.
So Mateo, just so you know, the select board is reviewing the warrant, the entire warrant at the select board meeting on Tuesday night.
Yeah,
So,
And I got an email from Becky today.
okay,
reminding me to send this, so I told her that's what we're doing tonight.
Okay, great.
Okay. Is there a motion?
So moved.
I'll second.
Discussion? Seeing no discussion, we'll vote on the operational transfers warrant article language with the correct dollar amounts as recommended by the town accountant inserted. Farrell,
Aye.
Leo,
Aye.
Gallo, aye. Hanson,
Aye.
Geddes,
Aye.
Font.
Aye.
Okay. And the last of our 3 warrant articles for tonight, relative to administrative costs of the CPC. I didn't change this from the previous year. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
$2,500 for administrative costs.
Alan, you said second?
Yeah.
Is there any discussion? Seeing none, Farrell,
Aye.
Leo,
Aye.
Hanson,
Aye.
Geddes,
Aye.
Defont,
Aye.
Gallo, aye.
Mateo, I had my hand up. We were gonna also have the article for the $5,000 for the Conservation Commission to do the parking at, what's that called, Miriam?
West Quabbin Woodlands.
West Cobbin, yeah. So
tra-
that was,
I believe we did that.
we
at the
wrote
end.
that already?
Yeah, we did that at the end of the March
Oh,
meeting.
okay, all right. Okay,
Yeah, so at Donna's recommendation, it's actually 2 articles. One is rescinding 5,000 from the R15 purchase, and then the second is assigning the 5,000 to the Conservation Commission for the parking area.
okay, great. I'd forgotten that.
And the Lake Wyola North Cove project article was also from March as well. Okay. We'll proceed now to item 4 on the agenda, discussion of public comments regarding the Amherst Regional High School track and fields project application. There's no action to take on this item, so this is a point of discussion. Are there members of the committee who would like to respond? So this, I do see your hand, Robert. This is not a public hearing right now. We're responding to the letter that we received.
I understand. I was just going to ask you to repeat what you said initially. I didn't follow you.
So this item on the agenda is item 4, discussion of public comments regarding the track and fields project application. Because the committee received a letter about that application, and there was some indication from the committee that they would like to respond to it. Miriam?
I'm going to recuse myself because my husband was one of the signatories of that letter.
Duly noted. Are there other comments from members of the committee? Henry?
Yeah. Again, don't want to sound like a broken record here. But at the same time, I want to distance myself from the comments that were made by folks who came forward. I still cannot I guess, comprehend the framing that was done here to define the issue, which was the Silverio case. And the fact that we decided not to look at the science. And this is where I became quite convinced, even though I was undecided. The science makes for I guess, an ethical obligation here. Just as Leverett and Pelham decided to make that choice. I don't think that we would be prejudiced in any way to have commented on the science per se. And I think that's what those people brought to the table. Though I didn't hear anybody say anything about the most current science on it. It's an evolving thing. In fact, the EPA just announced last month their standards, 0 tolerance.
Are there additional comments from members of the committee? Seeing no additional comments, I will proceed to the next item on the agenda, which is in some ways related to the previous item on the agenda. Discussion of future public hearings, scheduling and purpose. As we were preparing for the March 23rd hearing, Stuart Sagener at the Community Preservation Coalition expressed his surprise to me that we were holding our hearing on specific applications. Section 5B1 of the CPA statute actually indicates that we should be holding our hearings before we start the application process, not at its conclusion, because the point of the hearing that's described in the statute is for the committee to gather public comments about the preservation plan with the purpose of updating it as it's needed. So based off of that, what I would like to propose is that we hold our public hearing for this coming fiscal year before the grant cycle begins. It's clear to me that there are people in the community that would like to share their thoughts about the community preservation plan and what it includes or does not include. And I know that I would welcome and like to hear those comments as we go about updating the plan in any way. But also I want to make sure that we are abiding by the language of the statute, which indicates that we are supposed to be hearing from people before we start accepting applications, really, and not at the end of the process. Elaine?
Well, what would we be hearing on, and would we then have hearings after we have received applications?
So Stuart's observation was that we can have hearings about applications. What we are required to do is have hearings to gather public input about the goals and priorities that the community has for how we spend community preservation funding. So the question of whether we have subsequent public hearings that's a whole different ballgame. As far as what we would be hearing from the public, I would not want to, venture a guess or conjecture about what it might be. Rita.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're using the right, terminology here, because in the statute, there is a requirement that we have an annual hearing to discuss, and I don't know the needs, the possibilities, which is what I think Stuart Sagener was referring to. And yes, we did sort of collapse it, and obviously we shouldn't have been doing that, but I think we had the opportunity to sort of now in the fall, as you say, I think it's a great idea to do it before the application cycle begins, so that people have an opportunity to say that we reach out to the public. What would you like to see us doing vis-a-vis community housing or vis-a-vis open space and recreation or historic preservation? And that becomes, part of the public hearing testimony. But I also just want to caution, when we keep talking about public hearings, there is sort of a very kind of legal format when you do a public hearing, which is publishing in the newspaper in 2 weeks and doing legal ads. And I wouldn't, that's a really expensive route to go. So I think we call them that, rather than calling them public hearings, which have their own distinct format, that we call, a public meeting, where we, are setting aside time so that when we get applications that, we're setting aside enough time for people to kind of give their input on applications to the committee.
Thank you, Rita. Miriam?
I'm sorry. Here I go. Sorry, I'm still muted. Term public hearing doesn't necessarily mean a meeting that requires a legal ad. Some statutes for certain kinds of regulatory activities require a legal notice in the newspaper and a butter notifications, but there are public hearings of all sorts that don't require those things. Usually a public hearing is something that's announced in advance. I think 2 weeks is usually the minimum, and that there's some opportunity for public testimony. And it is my understanding. The timing of this, I guess I wonder for the member, our activities are driven by the applications. We don't go out and solicit applications for affordable housing or for historical preservation. Usually it's the applicants are developing projects and bringing them to the CPC. So I'm just trying to imagine for the public, how would they meaningfully have input, and how would we have input unless we were going to be taking input from the public and then soliciting applications, which I don't think we usually do. So I think having some general public hearing about general goals isn't a bad idea, but it seems to me there needs to be an opportunity for public input on individual applications that are under consideration, whether that happens in November and December or happens in March. I'm not sure of the timing, but it seems like we do need to have a process for public comment on specific projects.
So, yeah, I mean, I would just point out, Miriam, that again, this is the language in the statute, that it's not like we're devising this, that the statute says that we are supposed to be gathering public input in order to sort of formulate what our priorities are. I mean, it's clear to me from, the letter that we were just discussing and the hearing process that we just had, that there is considerable amount of misinformation or unawareness about the community preservation plan and its place in the CPC's process and what it does. So I think having a public hearing to point out the list of goals and priorities and the criteria that are in it is good, as well as, getting some feedback from people about what they think is missing or what maybe shouldn't be in there. As far as, seeking comment on the applications that we receive, again, as I said, just a moment ago, there's no reason we can't do that as well. I would say, however, that I am reluctant to have public comment on questions of eligibility, because eligibility should be an objective question of law, because eligibility is a different subject than advisability. As Henry just pointed out, there are lots of reasons why something might not be a good idea, but that doesn't mean that under law it's ineligible. So I think having public comment early in the process is great. And I think having public comment as we talk about advisability is great. But having it in December when we're talking about eligibility might be premature. But as far as having that hearing about, you know, what is it that we should be looking for? Because you're right, we don't solicit. We're not supposed to be asking people for specific projects or proposing projects. But the law requires us to ask people, what should we be thinking about? For example, somebody might say we should be thinking about environmental impact. That's not in the preservation plan, but it's pretty clear to me from the public hearing we just had that that is of a concern to people in the community, right? Rita, sorry.
Okay, I don't want to belabor this public hearing, but the fact that it's been mentioned that it's a public hearing and therefore it should be following certain standards needs to be pointed out. It was not an official public hearing, as in the public hearing that we are required to do by virtue of the statute. I think the other challenge for us, and sort of Miriam, it gets to your point, is, you know, we have done a lot of outreach over time in the town newsletter and, you know, going to town committees saying that we have these funds available. Whether or not, you know, townspeople, you know, have at times sort of come up with ideas, you know, based on what they read about the Community Preservation Committee. I recall there was the school wanted to do a some sort of a greenhouse, and that was not an eligible activity, but it was prompted, the question was prompted by the information we put out there. So I think we just have to continue to try to educate people in town through the newsletter and through and working through, you know, town committees about the fact that we have this resource, and do people have ideas, and, you know, are there other things we should be incorporating into the community preservation plan?
And possibly if we have these hearings, then we could link them to the specific committees that would be appropriate for putting these proposals in. Because I think that some people don't realize, even though we publish it and we put it in the newsletter, they don't realize what the process is. I know that there have been town meetings before where people have said, well, let's use CPC money for this project. And it's like, well, okay, start at the beginning, and, you know, come next December, you put that in, and they don't realize that they can't do it right at town meeting. So I think it would be appropriate to have these preliminaries and have people brainstorming ideas and then hopefully connecting them to the appropriate committee.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way to think about it, as well as an opportunity, you know, obviously as a public hearing, to be a listening session for the committee to talk about how we might want to update the community preservation plan, but also to increase awareness in the public with, you know, what it is that the CPC does, how it works, what the plan is, what the process is. Because, you know, we just went through this whole thing this past year of updating the website and trying to streamline it and clarify it and make information easily accessible. And it's clear that, you know, there's more that we need to be doing to make that information available and evident to people. So having the public hearings also serve as an opportunity for us to communicate with the community a bit more about, you know, this is what we do, this is why we do it by the statute, and this is how you can, you know, apply for this funding for certain projects. I think is a great idea. Alan?
Just a short comment. Over the years, we've tried many different mechanisms for trying to engage the townspeople in the Community Preservation Committee. We had a couple of meetings, and we got one or two people that would show up at the meetings. We went to a whole bunch of committees in town to tell them what's going on. It's a losing battle. And I think the best thing to do is to simply do what we've been doing. In other words, the town newsletter, going to the committees and trying to talk to people that we know that have interest in building stuff for the town. It really is frustrating. I'm sure Rita had the same problem when she was. In fact, I know she did because she was there when I was there. And Elaine was there.
Mhm.
I remember, do either one of you remember the meeting when we had when one person showed up?
Yep.
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 So there you go, Mateo. It's a losing battle and you really got to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing.
Well, I'm gonna choose to remain optimistic about it. Maybe that's stupidity, but I mean, we do. The committee has done a lot over the past years, obviously, to the newsletters, the emails, the public meetings, the website. But I think we can add to that, tool in our toolkit, this idea of having an earlier, public hearing that we promote and advertise, and maybe that will improve both the number of applications we receive, but also public awareness about, again, what this committee does, what it doesn't do, what the law says, and how people can get involved. What kind.
I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I think you should, but I think we should maybe at some point do a little bit of brainstorming on different ways of attracting people to what the committee does, and because the things we've tried in the past have not been very successful. That's my point. I'll be glad to help if you got any bright ideas. I'm serious.
Balloons. We're gonna use balloons.
Balloons, that's a good idea.
Free snacks. That's what works at faculty meetings. All right. So again, there's no action on this item. I just wanted to sort of get the pulse of the committee about this. I mean, in many ways, we don't have a choice. We are required by the statute to have our hearing at the start of the process. So come September, I'm assuming is when we're going to aim to do it, before we sit down and sort of do the annual update of the preservation plan. We should aim to have, I think it would probably be good to have a meeting of the committee before we have a hearing by the committee. But we have at least one more meeting before even that, because over the summer we need to meet to talk about the grant contract for the cemetery commission, the grant agreement. Alan?
I'll make it quick. I agree with everything you said, but one thing I think we should add to that is this committee should start putting their heads together to figure out some ways of attracting interest in creating proposals for work in town. And that was my only point. We need to think about how we're going to do that. End of comment.
I mean, one thing that occurs to me, we send an email out to the all committee email, and I wonder if it might be better for me to actually do field trips to the committee meetings and just introduce the CPC and what it is that we do. And hey, we have money for you.
Sure. I mean, sure, we've done that too. I mean, when we've tried a lot of different techniques and not one of them has been very successful. And
I think some of what we need to some of what we need to do is to let people know how much money we have and what we can do with it. And I think that's the key, is that people don't understand how much money they could obtain from us. But you're right, Ellen. I mean, it's really hard to get people interested in doing something, which is kind of crazy because, there's money and
there's money to be had. Nobody's having it.
Right. Right.
It's insane. It's not on the, never mind. I'll stop ranting.
Is there, so we need to meet after town meeting for the discussion about the grant agreement. I'm assuming town meeting is going to approve the warrant article. Is it, I'm looking at Thursday, June 15th, which is 2 weeks after, or should we do it right after the meeting? Right after town meeting? Thursday, June 8th.
June 15th is good. Although, I don't know, Miriam, are you there? Is that a Conservation Commission night?
Calendar, hang on one sec.
The third Thursday.
I guess I'd probably prefer to do the 8th. In case we need to. I guess it doesn't matter. We can work around it.
I can't do the, so that's why I was suggesting the 15th.
Yeah, so we're meeting, the Concom is meeting on the, we're meeting on the 8th. We would be meeting on the second Thursday, so that's the 8th. So,
Okay, so the 15th is okay for you.
Thanks.
Henry, Elaine?
Yep.
Alan?
That works for me.
Works for me.
All right. It should not be a very long meeting.
Mateo, I have to bow out. I'm sorry.
Is there any other business from the committee?
I move to adjourn.
I'll second.
There's a motion to adjourn has been seconded. Paleo,
Aye.
Gallo, aye. Geddes,
Aye.
Farrell.
Aye.
Hans.
aye.
So moved. Have a good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.